I saved a smelting workshop. The boss rewarded me with £1,000,000. When my mom found out, she called me immediately, urging me to return to the village. She said my heroic deeds had spread throughout the village, and they wanted to hold a commendation ceremony for me.
You are the pride of the whole village now. They even said they would give you a bonus of 100,000 yuan. When are you planning to come back?
Mom, I'm still in the hospital. I can't get out of bed. Please tell the village that I won't be coming back.
The anesthesia had just worn off, and I was in excruciating pain, sweating profusely.
How can that be? The village said the money must be handed to you personally. If you don't come back, how am I supposed to get that 100,000 yuan?
This £1,000,000 was earned at the cost of my life. A month ago, there was an accident in the company's smelting workshop. The situation was urgent, and I only had time to tell my colleague on duty with me to get help. I grabbed a gas mask and ran into the workshop, braving the high temperatures and toxic gases. After I managed to shut off the valve, I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was already in the hospital. During my hospital stay, TV stations frequently visited and interviewed me. I was portrayed by major news platforms as a hero who, despite having a serious illness, did not forget the value of life and risked everything to save others.
Mom, I really can't move.
Thinking about how my mom didn't care about my condition and only wanted the money, I bit my lip silently, feeling increasingly cold-hearted.
Can't move? Don't try to fool me. It's just a broken leg. You can recover in the village clinic just the same. Emily, now that you've come into money, you have to think about your brother. He'll be starting high school next semester and will need money for many things in the future.
I clenched my fist. My mom's favoritism towards my brother was nothing new, but her indifference still hurt me.
Doesn't my treatment for stomach cancer require money too?
There was a long silence on the other end, then Jane said,
Cancer isn't something that can be easily treated. Throwing money at it is like pouring it down the drain. Emily, listen to me, bring the money back. It needs to be spent wisely.
I leaned my head against the car window, recalling my mom's concern during my serious illness, and let out a bitter laugh. Knowing full well that I was seriously injured and had stomach cancer, she showed no concern and only thought about that £1,000,000. She truly is my mother. A commendation ceremony, the pride of the village, she would rather I were gone so she could directly collect the compensation.
It seems we've arrived.
Indeed, we had. Before returning, I had informed the village that the interview crew and camera team would be coming back with me to shoot a documentary about the hero's upbringing. John was already waiting at the door, smiling broadly and waving at me. Through the car window, I looked at his honest and simple smile, which slowly overlapped with the smile he had when he used to hit me. John is a pure psychopath, a lunatic. When he hit people, he was always calm, as cold as an emotionless demon. He liked to smile while kicking me to the ground. Then he would use a stick, a belt, or even his fists to hit me.
Does it hurt? Don't cry. If anyone hears, it will be worse.
The trauma from domestic violence is irreversible. Even though I had left home 8 years ago, and I was no longer the Emily who could be bullied at will, my body still shuddered instinctively when I saw John's face.
It's a bit cold.
I smiled at the camera, naturally taking a coat from the car and draping it over myself. Jane came up, holding my hand and crying uncontrollably.
Emily, why didn't you tell me? It's so pitiful, so young and already with cancer.
Her sorrowful appearance seemed genuinely concerned. If it weren't for the phone call in the hospital, I might have believed her performance. I looked at Jane coldly, noticing she was still as beautiful as when she was younger. She cried silently, just looking at you with tears in her eyes. Even though she was nearly 50, she still had a fragile and pitiful look. Back then, Jane used this crying method to escape from John's beatings repeatedly, shifting the violence onto me. She always looked weak and helpless, handing John anything that could be used as a weapon, feather dusters, belts, coal hooks, then stood by, watching those things hit me over and over, crying sorrowfully and innocently. Occasionally, she would help my father persuade me.
You should just admit your mistake. Promise not to make your dad angry again. There's no such big grudge among family members.
Admit my mistake? Only if I had done something wrong could I admit my mistake. I had merely spilled some water while pouring it, and it had dripped onto the table. How could such a pure accident be considered a mistake? At such times, John would hit me even harder.
Is your hand broken? Can't even pour a glass of water properly. What's the use of having this hand?
I came out of my memories, lightly patting Jane's shoulder and giving her a hug.
Mom, don't cry. Your concern for me is a bit overwhelming.
The atmosphere around us paused for a moment. Jane forced a smile, even forgetting to cry. John took this moment to come over, pulling both Jane and me into his arms, crying in front of the camera.
It's good to have you back. It's good to have you back.
He cried earnestly, like a treasured possession that had wandered for years and was finally recovered. I gently broke free from his embrace, trying to make my smile look bright.
Dad, can we go inside first? You don't plan to let me freeze outside like when I was a child, do you?
John's smile finally faltered. I watched his hand, hidden behind his back, clench and unclench, and I smiled happily. The house had changed a lot. Many of the furniture pieces I remembered were gone, and the walls had been repainted, looking much brighter than I remembered.
This was partly my doing.
Sending money home every month, this was the condition John set for allowing me to study 300 kilometers away. A condition that had to be followed. Otherwise, he would go to my school and arrange for my withdrawal, claiming that my moderate depression made it impossible for me to study and live normally. But he didn't know that I had already dropped out, not because of moderate depression, but severe depression.
Due to long-term domestic violence, I was timid and not good at talking to people. What seemed like a trivial matter to others would cause me great fear.
I worried about not doing things well. I worried that no one liked me. I worried that my clumsiness would trouble others. The stress response from long-term beatings made me afraid to get too close to my classmates for a long time. Even if they just raised their hands, I would instinctively flinch and then avoid them. Because of John, I lived in constant worry and fear.
Even when I temporarily escaped from him, I became an outcast and a freak in the eyes of my classmates.
I was isolated and ridiculed, making my situation worse. The environment made my moderate depression easily develop into severe depression, and my body started to have problems.
I would faint during class, have difficulty breathing, lose strength in my limbs, experience auditory and visual hallucinations, and even walking became a huge challenge. At the worst times, I couldn't even hold chopsticks, making eating a problem.
Unable to hold chopsticks, I used my hands to grab food, desperately stuffing it into my mouth. Eating while vomiting, but I had to eat because I wanted to live more than anyone else. Not eating would lead to death. Eating caused vomiting, which led to stomach issues, eventually becoming a factor in my stomach cancer. At my worst, I resolutely dropped out and quickly moved out of school. I only had 2,000 yuan saved from my part-time jobs, half of which had to be sent to John. But I didn't regret it. Because I knew that besides myself, no one truly cared whether I lived or died.
If I stayed at school, even though living expenses would be reduced, facing those unfriendly words might really drive me to jump off a building.
After leaving school, I found a job trimming threads, easy to learn and included meals and accommodation. I earned 1,500 yuan a month. 1,000 yuan was sent home, and the remaining 500 was for my medication. I wanted to live. The village indeed held a commendation ceremony for me, right at our dining table. The content was simple, a few words of praise, and it was over. As for the so-called 100,000 yuan, not a word was mentioned. After thinking it over, I realized it was just a scam.
They tricked me into coming back, took the $1,000,000, and then discarded me like trash.
Facing the camera, John seemed a bit uneasy. He invited all the guests to sit down and then directed Jane to the kitchen to cook. I lazily glanced inside, knowing that John would definitely lose his temper later. Sure enough, as soon as he entered the kitchen, his face darkened in just 2 seconds. He glanced at the cameraman outside, then whispered angrily to Jane.
Can you eat potato strips cut like this?
As he spoke, he instinctively raised his fist but quickly realized it was inappropriate for the occasion, so he changed it to a pat on Jane's head. Jane's body trembled slightly.
Mom, let me do it.
John immediately looked pleased. The photographer, Paul, moved closer with his equipment, and John began to boast in front of the camera.
Say what you will, but my daughter's knife skills are top-notch. She's been cutting beautiful potato strips since elementary school.
He picked a few strips from the already cut potatoes to show everyone. In the sunlight, the evenly cut potato strips glistened, looking translucent and beautiful. I lowered my head, appropriately showing a shy expression.
Dad, please stop. My knife skills were honed by your beatings, weren't they? Oh, and my eye.
I pointed to my right eye, which had always been blurry, and smiled at him.
Do you remember? Because of a plate of imperfectly cut potato strips, my eye is now almost blind.
John's face showed a moment of rage. He gritted his teeth and forced a smile.
You kid, always joking.
Then, as if joking, he slapped me. That slap was heavy, making my body sway, my expression twisting in pain for a moment. The slap, without holding back, seemed to warn me, think carefully before you speak.
You're the one joking, Dad. If my knife skills weren't good, would I still be standing here? I would have been beaten to death by you, right? After all, your standards for potato strips are exceptionally high.
Watching the veins on his temple twitch, his forced smile as he left the kitchen, I smiled even brighter. John's harsh words echoed in my mind, his voice filled with disdain.
Is your hand broken? Can't even pour a glass of water properly. What's the use of having this hand?
I shook off the memory, patting Jane's shoulder and giving her a comforting hug.
Mom, don't cry. Your concern for me is a bit overwhelming.
Jane forced a smile, even forgetting to cry. At that moment, John approached, pulling both Jane and me into his arms.
It's good to have you back. It's good to have you back.
He cried earnestly, as if he had recovered a lost treasure. I gently broke free from his embrace, trying to smile brightly.
Dad, can we go inside first? You don't plan to let me freeze outside like when I was a child, do you?
John's smile faltered, his hand hidden behind his back clenched and unclenched. After a satisfying meal, Jane served tea. Margaret put down her teacup and turned to me with a probing question.
Did your boss really reward you with $1 million? $1 million is not a small amount. Don't carry it around and get swindled. It's better to think about how to use this money while you're still energetic, so the family won't worry.
I slowly wiped my mouth and looked up at her. Asking about the money so quickly? Interesting.
We're not after your money. Isn't it just right that the village secretary is here to witness?
Margaret continued sipping her tea leisurely, with the demeanor of a family head. I smiled lightly, looking at the elderly woman who had once pushed me into the abyss. It was she who repeatedly gave false testimony, telling the police that I was beaten by my father because I liked to take her things and wouldn't change my ways. But the one who took was not me. It was Michael. She always knew. Despite knowing the truth, she still gave false testimony and accused me.
Who hasn't been disciplined as a child? Just you, so delicate, can't be touched?
Sure, but you can't falsely accuse me of taking your things. You can't tell the police that your own granddaughter is a thief just to exonerate your son and grandson.
I put down the teapot and continued to twist the knife. Margaret, humiliated and furious, pointed at me and cursed.
It's wrong to report your father. What kind of good girl gets the police to arrest her own father?
Even if he was abusive?
Abusive? Who doesn't discipline their kids? Just you, so precious, can't be touched?
You don't think this counts as abuse?
I pulled down my jacket, revealing only a strapless top underneath. The skin exposed outside the top was covered with overlapping scars, almost no intact skin visible. The stark contrast between the white top and the crisscrossed skin made Sarah, sitting next to me, gasp in shock.
Oh my God, that must have hurt so much.
Yes. How much did it hurt? Just enough to make me want to end it 100 times? 1,000 scars. 1,000 strikes. Each one had to draw blood, tear flesh. As for the bruises that didn't break the skin, they were long gone 8 years ago. After letting the camera capture a close-up, I put my clothes back on and quietly looked at everyone present.
You think this doesn't count as abuse?
I laughed until I cried, laughed hysterically, like a madwoman. 8 years. Some of the scars were even 10 or 20 years old, still not healed. My body, ravaged by John for so many years, without ruptured organs, without broken limbs, was a miracle.
With reporters here, what do you want to do? Drive me to my grave?
Perhaps due to the presence of outsiders, or maybe because of the million, John surprisingly didn't explode. He put on a repentant expression, crying.
8 years, you've been outside for 8 years, you've changed, and so has Dad. From the moment you walked in, hasn't Dad been tolerant and patient with you? Why can't you give Dad a chance?
I didn't expect John to display such powerful acting skills at this moment, so convincing that I almost believed it.
I came back this time, bringing $1 million, just to reconcile with everyone. Dad, I just want an apology from all of you. Is that too much to ask?
In the cold and dimly lit room, tensions were high as the past began to unravel.
How could such a pure accident be considered a mistake?
John's anger boiled over, and he raised his hand, ready to strike.
Is your hand broken? Can't even pour a glass of water properly. What's the use of having this hand?
I snapped out of my memories, gently patting Jane's shoulder and giving her a comforting hug.
Mom, don't cry. Your concern for me is a bit overwhelming.
The atmosphere paused for a moment, and Jane forced a smile, even forgetting to cry. John seized the moment, pulling both Jane and me into a tight embrace, tears streaming down his face.
It's good to have you back, it's good to have you back.
His tears were earnest, as if he had found a long-lost treasure.
Dad, can we go inside first? You don't plan to let me freeze outside like when I was a child, do you?
John's smile faltered, and his hand, hidden behind his back, clenched and unclenched. I smiled brightly, hiding the turmoil within. Margaret answered Emily's question with her actions. The old lady still held her head high.
I can talk, but you can't let them film.
Emily adjusted the flower on her collar and nodded, signaling Paul and Sarah to take their equipment to the next room.
Michael told me that if I told the police you were beaten because you stole money and didn't listen, everyone would be happy. He also said that spreading rumors about your uncleanliness would make you drop out of school and save the family money.
The old lady frowned, full of reluctance. Emily looked at her quietly.
You spread those words that almost drove me to despair, just to save money?
A few words could drive you to despair? If you didn't want to live, why drag me into it?
Emily laughed bitterly.
Yes, it was me who didn't want to live. But who made me not want to live?
Emily took a deep breath to calm her emotions and looked at Michael.
Grandma said it was all your doing. Do you have anything to say?
What did I do? I just said a few words. What does it have to do with me if Grandma followed through? Sis, can you stop targeting me? If you want to blame someone, isn't Mom even more vicious?
Emily turned sharply, looking at Jane in disbelief.
It was her suggestion. Wasn't what she did to me enough, and she even sold me out? She doesn't deserve to be a mother.
Facing Emily's overwhelming anger, Jane shrank back into the corner, looking fragile.
I didn't know your dad would take it seriously. I just mentioned it.
And there's more. Sis, you don't know, do you? After you got involved with David, didn't you get pregnant with his child? David was planning to marry you, and you could have escaped this misery. But didn't you lose the baby after a beating?
What?
Do you remember the cold chicken salad that made John have diarrhea? There was a laxative in it. Mom put it there.
I was scared.
She was afraid of being beaten, so she made you take the fall, and the baby was lost. Oh, I remember. Didn't you become unable to have children because of that? Well, at least you won't have another daughter for Mom and Dad to torment.
Michael's gloating words hit Emily one after another. Her mind buzzed, her vision blurred, and her hearing almost gone. She struggled to stay conscious.
Emily, are you okay?
The scene before Emily finally cleared up. It was Sarah. Emily withdrew her hand from her embrace and smiled, telling her she was fine.
How could I dare to be unwell?
With the truth about to be fully revealed, in this family full of monsters, if Emily showed any weakness, they would swarm and devour her completely.
Mom, don't you have anything to say?
I sat up straight and looked at Jane.
Emily, don't hate me. I was forced to. Your dad, if he didn't hit you, he would hit me. I didn't want this either. Who told you to be a girl?
Who told me to be a girl? So, it's all my fault? It's my fault for entering her womb, my fault for being born?
So, you pushed everything you didn't want to do onto me? I deserve to be beaten. I deserve to be humiliated. I deserve to be born. Everything you forced upon me, I deserve to endure? My purpose in life is to shield you from disasters? How do you treat my brother? How do you treat me? It's not that you can't love others, you just can't love me. Since that's the case.
My voice was already choked with sobs, filled with resentment, anger, and grievance. I almost screamed the remaining words.
Why did you give birth to me in the first place?
I didn't want you to be a girl either. The family needed a descendant, right?
Jane's voice was very soft, like helplessness, like a sigh, like she had suffered a lot of grievances. I bit my lip, barely swallowing the curse words that almost escaped my mouth.
To hell with the family needing a descendant. Is Michael the family's descendant? He was clearly taken from someone else. I saw you bring him back when he was less than a month old. You even faked a pregnancy to deceive everyone, including Dad.
Mom, do you dare to swear that Michael is your and Dad's child?
Jane was startled.
What are you talking about? Of course, Michael is our child. He's your brother. He's flesh of my flesh.
Flesh of your flesh? What kind of flesh is that? It's clearly a water bag and a pillow.
I no longer argued with Jane and turned to look at John.
Dad, don't you find it strange? Why did Mom never let you go with her for checkups? Why did she never let you touch her belly?
Isn't it strange? Even the worst husband would have the urge to touch the baby in the womb, right?
What's strange about it? Your dad has no patience. I didn't want him to get angry, so I didn't let him accompany me. And what's wrong with not letting him touch? Your dad is rough. If he accidentally hurt the baby, wouldn't that be worse? Michael is supposed to carry on the family line.
Then why, on the day of delivery, did you go to the hospital alone without telling anyone? Such a big event as childbirth, why didn't you want family with you? Isn't it because you were guilty? I found out that from pregnancy to delivery, you never went to the hospital. Michael didn't just pop out of a rock, did he? Mom, you're really something.
John looked at Jane with suspicion.
Is what she's saying true?
He had already clenched his fists, as if he would immediately swing them if Jane confirmed it. Michael was also dumbfounded, as if he had suffered a great blow, his eyes vacant, no longer as arrogant as before.
Mom, you're not my real mom!
She's lying! Michael is my child! You must be jealous of him, that's why you're saying this! Michael is your brother! He's flesh of my flesh!
Am I lying? Don't you know best? Otherwise, why did you become more and more displeased with me after Michael came to the family? You even gave Dad ideas? Isn't it because I accidentally saw what you did, and you thought I'd be safest dead? If I died, no one would know your secret, right?
You're lying! Michael is my child! You must be jealous of him, that's why you're saying this!
Michael, you know best how I've treated you. If you weren't my child, why would I treat you so well?
This was indeed a good reason. Michael was somewhat shaken. He was tightly held by Jane, looking a bit at a loss.
Why? Because you need to use Michael as a shield, right? Sooner or later, I would get married and not leave a descendant for the family. Without Michael, wouldn't Dad beat you to death sooner or later? And how could a person without the ability to have children give birth?
Since I was born, John had rarely hit Jane. So, the loss of her ability to have children could only have happened in the early years after I was born, because I was a girl, from the almost fatal beating she received. John clearly understood this. He waved his fist in front of Jane, threatening.
We'll settle the matter of Michael later.
But Michael didn't think so. He quickly understood the truth from John's attitude. He suddenly went crazy and lunged at Jane, muttering.
Who are my real parents? Who wants to live in this poor family? Who allowed you to bring me back?
Jane didn't expect Michael to hit her. After all, she had put almost all her effort into him over the years. After taking a few hits, Jane started fighting back, and Margaret also went up to help, but she was helping Michael.
I had no choice. John, he didn't make money, and I had no ability. It was David who found me, saying I looked good and was easy to handle. I gave all those children to him. He was responsible for getting them registered, making documents. I only kept Michael.
What nonsense are you talking about?
David bypassed the chair to hit her but was stopped by Michael, who gave him a good beating.
You were involved in my abduction too? You're no good either.
David was beaten and ran for cover, cursing Jane as he dodged.
Jessica, are you crazy? I didn't abduct any children or make any documents with you. If you want to end it, do it yourself. Don't drag me into it.
What? You want to clear yourself? No way! I have recordings and videos. I recorded you and your superiors. You can't escape.
Everything was in chaos. Michael was hitting David, David was chasing Jane, and Margaret was pulling David's hair. Sarah was nowhere to be seen, and even Paul was missing. John walked over with a sneer, clenching his fist, and threatened me with a fierce look.
I don't care about apologies. Give me the money, and you can go wherever you want. If you don't, you know what I'll do.
I know. At most, you'll beat me like when I was a kid.
The fruit knife in my hand moved lightly, and the complete peel fell from my hand. I looked seriously at the man I called father and smiled.
Guess what? Even if you apologize, I don't plan to give you the money because you don't deserve it.
John, enraged, lunged at me with his fist. The knife fell to the ground, and I was pinned against the table by John, his fists raining down on me, just like 8 years ago. After a while, he seemed unsatisfied, dragging me by the hair and slamming my head against the wall. Paul suddenly appeared from somewhere, trying to help me, but John knocked him down with a chair.
If you don't want to suffer, give me the money.
It's useless, Dad. Even if you harm me, the money won't be yours.
I tilted my head, spitting at him mockingly.
Remember, as long as you don't harm me today, I'll find a way to send you to jail.
John threw me to the ground. He picked up the fruit knife from the floor, approaching me with a sinister smile.
Not talking, huh? Then I'll harm you first. Let's see how you send me to jail.
Harm me? How could you bear to? That's $1 million. If I suffer, the money will automatically go to charity. You won't have a chance to get it. I'll never give you the money.
John, driven mad, harmed me several times in the abdomen with the knife, pain I had never experienced before. The police broke in at this moment, but John, oblivious, continued trying to harm me, determined to end me. I realized that if I didn't fight back, I would suffer before the police could stop him. Enduring the pain, I grabbed the blade with my hand. As John tried to harm my heart, I kicked him hard in the groin and turned the blade towards his chest. Everything was chaotic. Jane and Michael were still fighting, Margaret was lying by the table, David was unconscious, and Paul was on the ground, his condition unknown. My vision blurred. I reached out and grabbed someone's hand, telling them,
My mom has evidence. Protect her first.
I was allowed to see visitors only after lying in bed for 3 days. Paul, dressed in a police uniform, brought me a banner recognizing me as an outstanding citizen.
Thanks to your bravery, Emily, we've made a significant breakthrough.
It was all a setup, a sting operation initiated by the local police to take down a human trafficking ring.
Ever since the company announced they were giving me $1 million bonus, Jane had been contacting me to come back. After I refused a dozen times, Officer Robert found me and talked about Jane. That's when I learned that Jane had deep ties with the human trafficking ring.
Emily, we need your help to take them down. Will you cooperate?
I agreed immediately and played along with their plan.
The interview was fake, the photographer was a disguised police officer, and I never received that $1 million. Only the stomach cancer was real. To ensure John faced justice, I secretly installed a camera and started a live stream without Paul and Sarah knowing. My intention was to expose the ugly truth about the Lynn family to the public. Unexpectedly, this indirectly helped the police.
Because of your live stream, public attention was drawn to the case, giving us ample reason to move around the village and gather evidence.
Officer Robert told me that Margaret had passed away due to Michael's mistake. Although he didn't intend to harm her, he still had to face the consequences. John also passed away from my knife. Although he was rushed to the hospital immediately, he couldn't be saved.
You really weren't afraid of causing a scene by using me and Anna for the live stream. But thanks to the live stream records, John's death was ruled as self-defense. Smile, girl, at least you won't go to jail.
A gentle hand rested on my head, solid and comforting. I felt a shift in my heart, as if a heavy stone lodged in my chest had been pried loose. Just as I was about to say something, Anna rushed over.
I watched the video later, and it scared me to death. Do you know? The internet went crazy over John stabbing you. Your live stream was shut down immediately.
What about the human traffickers? Were they all caught?
Officer Robert and Sarah exchanged uneasy looks. When I gave them a questioning glance, they both turned their heads away simultaneously.
What happened?
Well, because of your live stream, the tag exploded.
Isn't that a good thing?
Doesn't it show that our netizens have a strong sense of justice and moral values? But their expressions seemed to tell me that wasn't the case. I checked the latest news online and realized things were indeed different. A bunch of senseless idiots were stirring up trouble, claiming our family's situation was a publicity stunt for money.
A publicity stunt? For money? Try living under constant threat for 19 years for money. Try exposing your wounds after being violated for money. Try getting stabbed a few times for money.
Seeing my distress, Officer Robert quickly comforted me.
Don't take it to heart. We're already monitoring the situation. It's just a matter of days.
I glanced at the village's statement and sneered.
They really want to push me to the edge.
I even received threatening messages on my phone, saying they would take action if I didn't delete the videos. I'm naturally rebellious. I wouldn't have dared to confront my family's hellish environment with just a camera.
Since they threatened action, I wanted to see what they would do.
So, I logged into my social media and reposted the village's statement. I added a comment, actually, this village doesn't even have John, Emily, Michael, or Jessica. Do you believe it? My sarcasm had the desired effect. By the evening, the situation had reversed. Sharp-eyed netizens, without waiting for me to speak, pointed out the inconsistencies.
Who the hell calls this a stunt? Look at the parents' instinctive reactions and expressions. Does that look like acting?
Scars can be faked, but detailed actions can't. Did anyone notice John's reaction when Emily spoke to him? If not for the camera, he would have lost it.
And the grandmother. Her hands were shaking with anger. You call this acting? If they were acting, we'd have swept the Oscars.
This village must be toxic, lying through their teeth.
Seeing the overwhelmingly supportive comments under the statement, I felt a bit relieved.
Don't use your phone, Emily. Anna, keep an eye on her.
Officer Robert issued a strict order forbidding me from using my phone and asked Anna to keep an eye on me. To ensure the order was enforced, he even assigned another female officer to take shifts with Anna. Anna, having just gone through a scare, agreed, as she had a week off. I understood Officer Robert's intentions. With his years of experience, he knew that online harassment wouldn't end so easily. The next afternoon, the village issued a second statement, steering public opinion in a new direction. The statement essentially said, after a thorough investigation, parts of the domestic violence incident involving John were found to be true. Jane and Michael are indeed not biologically related, and his background needs further verification, with the possibility of a secret adoption not ruled out. No one in the village committee was involved. John did have some domestic violence behavior, which indirectly led to mental issues for both Jane and me. In other words, Emily and Jessica both have mental issues, and their words can't be trusted. This is just a farce caused by a mentally ill person having an episode. Everyone, disperse. I didn't have the chance to go online. This news was told to me by a stranger over the phone.
I was her college classmate, and I can prove Emily is a lunatic. When she goes through a tough time, she even hurts herself.
He proudly relayed the village's statement and the villagers' attitudes to me. He read out the netizens' comments to me, word by word.
Just by how you talk, I can tell you're no good. If you were a good kid, why would your dad hit you?
Those words hit me, each one like a blow. I knew every word separately, but together, they made no sense. Aren't I the victim here? John, Jane, Michael, and Margaret, even David, they all admitted their actions directly or indirectly during the live broadcast. Why do these people choose to turn a blind eye? Being beaten, insulted, even violated, I can't resist, not even the right to question?
Emily, what's wrong?
Anna ran over, snatching the phone from my hand. The man's voice continued, spewing more venomous words. She was shocked and quickly hung up. It wasn't until a tissue appeared in front of me that I realized I was trembling all over, tears streaming down my face. Anna's concern broke my emotional dam, and I clung to her arm, sobbing uncontrollably.
Why don't I even have the right to speak? I just want to live.
The aftermath of my breakdown was my wound reopening. After being treated again, I wasn't allowed to sit up until it healed. Anna, fearing another breakdown, took the initiative to find the latest public opinion for me. Most questions were about the trafficking incident.
If it's fake, why was David so terrified at the time, even resorting to violence?
We specifically asked the local hospital, and there's no record of Jessica's prenatal checkups or hospitalization. Without a birth certificate, how did Michael get registered if no one helped?
Didn't Jessica say she had evidence? Where are the audio and video? Are they being withheld because they are unfavorable to you?
The village's reaction is too strange, avoiding the main issues too obviously.
I feel like they're controlling the narrative to hide the real purpose and cyberbully Emily.
We demand a thorough investigation. Reveal the truth.
Some even dug up that Michael might not be the only trafficked child in the village. Netizens, dissatisfied, found more detailed issues.
For instance, if it was just an isolated case, why were more trafficked children found in the town over time?
And when falsifying registration, David was just an accountant. To perfect the documents, he needed help. Yet you claim it was a personal act?
The online uproar was intense. Anna angrily questioned Robert.
Don't you have evidence showing it would stop this online war? Emily is on the verge of collapse.
Robert probably didn't expect the issue to escalate so much. He sighed.
Maybe there will be results in a few days. Don't answer any calls or go online.
When the dust settled, I finally learned the outcome of the situation. The keen insight of netizens had elevated the matter to a high level, allowing Officer Robert and his team to fully showcase their skills. Through their almost sleepless efforts, the human trafficking group behind Jane was uprooted. The audio and video provided by Jane were made public. It turned out that this was a scheme within a scheme.
We had planned to protect you before taking action, but you still got hurt. We are truly sorry. We will compensate you for this.
I shook my head and refused. The live streaming was my own impulsive decision. It was fortunate that I didn't ruin their operation. I had no right to question or blame them.
Moreover, the online harassment was, in a way, a continuation of my unauthorized live streaming. Although Officer Robert and his team didn't provide evidence to clarify the situation in time, catching the few individuals with evidence and uprooting the entire network was undoubtedly the best outcome. Besides, once the truth came to light, the online harassment ended. I had no regrets or sadness, it was all worth it to me.
Did you catch them all?
Of course! Thanks to you, the online outcry forced us to work overtime to catch them, and we succeeded. Also, your experience resonated with many victims of domestic violence. Xing Group decided to establish a special fund to assist victims of domestic violence. Girl, your efforts and pain were not in vain.
I nodded, looking at him, hesitant to speak. He immediately understood what I wanted to ask, didn't say much, just handed me a piece of paper, and then left with his team. The paper had the date and location of Jane's trial. After hesitating for a few days, I ultimately didn't go on that day. After Jane's sentence was handed down, I went to see her in the detention center. Jane still looked beautiful, even though she was about to face the ultimate penalty.
You are my daughter! Why did you conspire with others to harm me?
I didn't answer but asked her.
Mom, do you regret treating me the way you did?
Jane was stunned, not saying a word.
Do you know? John, before he passed away, kept denying everything. He said your involvement in human trafficking had nothing to do with him, that he never asked you to be a trafficker to support him. He said you deserved your fate.
Mom, you see, Dad was always like that. Even though you ruined yourself for him and ruined me, in the end, he only loved himself.
What were you thinking?
Jane, on the other side of the shatterproof glass, suddenly burst into tears, crying ugly but genuinely. I stood up and walked out, vaguely hearing Jane say, "I'm sorry." At that moment, I couldn't help but burst into tears. People only repent when they face desperate situations. But this heartfelt apology, I had waited too long for it, and it came too late.